The rain struck the rural roads of Hampshire with unusual fury that autumn afternoon of 1845. Count Alexander Blackwood galloped down the muddy path, his imposing figure wrapped in a black cape that fluttered in the wind like a banner of ill omen. At the fork leading to his estate, a barely audible rustling beneath the storm's roar brought his horse to an abrupt halt. There, under an ancient oak tree, he discovered a young woman curled up and soaked to the bone. Her dress, though of fine quality, was stained and torn, and her pale hands desperately protected her swollen belly. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, the Count calculated as he dismounted with agility, despite the scar that marked his left leg, a permanent reminder of the war. "What is a lady doing in such a state alone in this storm?" he asked with a grave voice, extending his cape to cover her. She raised her face, revealing green eyes reddened by tears and a beauty that, though marred by suffering, was undeniable. "I am no longer a lady, my lord," she replied, with a voice broken, yet dignified. "My family cast me out this morning. I have nowhere to go." The Count observed her belly and immediately understood the situation. He had witnessed too much human cruelty to be surprised. "And the child's father?" he inquired. "He promised marriage and fled to the Indies when he learned of my condition," she answered, momentarily regaining her composure. "He was a merchant's son. Our families conducted business together. I believed his promises. Alexander Blackwood knew well the bitter taste of betrayal and dishonor. It had been merely 3 years since London's high society had condemned him to ostracism for a scandal that destroyed his reputation, forcing him to seek refuge in this rural property, far from accusing glances and malicious whispers. "What is your name?" he asked, offering his hand to help her rise. "Isabella Crawford, my lord." A flash of lightning illuminated the young woman's face, and something in the determination of her gaze, despite her misfortune, stirred something within the Count that he had long believed dead. "Miss Crawford, I cannot leave you here to die of cold or worse," he said firmly. "I shall take you to my house. There you may dry yourself and recover while we decide what must be done." Isabella hesitated. The rumors about Count Blackwood had reached even her ears. They called him the dishonored Count, and it was whispered that he had betrayed his country, caused his fiancée's death, or committed some equally terrible act. "Why would you help an unknown woman fallen into disgrace?" she asked with suspicion. Alexander smiled bitterly. "Because I recognize despair when I see it, Miss Crawford, and because perhaps we both deserve a second chance." With a fluid movement, he mounted his horse and extended his arm to help her climb. The moment their hands touched, an inexplicable certainty took hold of the Count. This woman and her child would change his fate forever. "I propose an arrangement, Miss Crawford," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. "In marriage, you shall regain your social position, your child will have a name, and I shall have a reason to continue living." Isabella's eyes widened in amazement at such a proposition. "Marriage. Today. Are you mad, my lord?" "Perhaps," he answered with a resolution he had not felt in years. "But sometimes madness is the only sensible path when everything else has failed." The Blackwood mansion stood imposing at the end of the road, its Gothic towers silhouetted against the stormy sky. Isabella gazed, fascinated, through the carriage window that the Count had sent to fetch her after first taking her to the local priest's house. Everything had happened so quickly that she could barely comprehend it. In a matter of hours, she had gone from being a repudiated woman to becoming the Countess of Blackwood. "Do you truly wish to know nothing about me before this hasty marriage?" she asked as the mansion approached. Alexander, who rode alongside the carriage in the relentless rain, looked at her intently. "We shall have time to become acquainted. What matters now is providing you and your child with security." When they arrived, 2 servants with petrified expressions received them with poorly concealed bewilderment. The news that the Count was returning with a pregnant wife would spread like wildfire throughout the region before dawn. "The Countess requires dry clothes and a hot meal," Alexander ordered with authority. "Prepare the eastern chamber for her." Once settled before the library fire, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of steaming tea in her hands, Isabella observed the enigmatic man who was now her husband. Tall, with a strong yet elegant bearing, black hair prematurely streaked with silver at the temples and gray eyes like steel. A thin scar crossed his right cheek, adding a dangerous air to his handsome face. "Now that we are in private, my lord, I believe I deserve to know what manner of scandal has made you a social pariah," she said with courage. "If I am to share your name and your house, I must know the truth." Alexander contemplated the flames for a long time before speaking. 3 years ago, I served as a diplomat abroad. I was entrusted with delicate information regarding British military movements. His voice was a controlled murmur. That information was leaked, causing the deaths of 12 soldiers. They blamed me for treason, and rightly so. "A traitor?" Isabella asked, surprised by her own audacity. "Not by choice," he answered bitterly. "I was deceived by one I believed my closest friend, Lord Pembroke. He gained access to my documents while He stopped abruptly. "While I shared the bed of his sister, Lady Catherine." Isabella felt a blush rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. Was Lady Catherine aware of her brother's plans? "I shall never know for certain," Alexander replied with old pain in his gaze. "She took her own life when the scandal broke. They blamed me for that as well. Pembroke ensured that all blame would fall upon me, and you did not attempt to defend yourself. Without proof, it was my word against that of a respected man. I chose exile over facing a possible trial for treason where everything was against me. I withdrew here, severed ties with my former life, and accepted my fate. And now, after confessing this, are you still willing to be my wife?" Isabella reflected on her own story before answering. She had met Thomas Willoughby at a social gathering. He, with his sweet words and promises of eternal love, had gradually seduced her until she, innocent and inexperienced, had surrendered to his advances, believing they would soon announce their engagement. When she discovered her pregnancy and told him, he vanished. 2 weeks later, she learned he had absconded to India. Her family, upon discovering her condition, had cast her out that very morning, giving her little time to gather her belongings. "We have both been betrayed, my lord," she finally said. "Perhaps that makes us ideal companions in misfortune." Alexander approached and took a seat across from her. "I propose a pact, Isabella. I shall not ask for more than I am willing to give. I shall respect your space and your time. In return, I offer you my name, my protection, and the promise to treat your child as if he were my own." His deep voice acquired a softer tone when he added, "I do not know if we shall ever find something more than mutual respect between us, but I am willing to try if you are as well." Isabella extended her hand to him. "I accept your proposal, Alexander. A new beginning for us both." The small chapel of Septon had never witnessed such a peculiar wedding. Outside, the rain continued to fall relentlessly, as if the sky itself wept for the strange union about to be celebrated. Reverend Jenkins and the elderly man with a kind face looked bewildered at Count Blackwood and the pregnant young woman he had brought with him. "My lord, are you entirely certain of this?" he asked in a low voice while Isabella waited on a nearby bench. "The circumstances are unusual, to say the least." "I am certain, father," Alexander responded firmly. "Prepare everything necessary." The Reverend, who had known the Count since childhood, resigned himself. He had witnessed Alexander's unfortunate fall, and though he did not believe the malicious rumors about him, he never imagined the proud nobleman would end up marrying a woman pregnant with another man's child. The ceremony was brief and austere. Isabella wore a simple pale blue dress found among Alexander's late mother's belongings, hastily altered to accommodate her belly. The mansion's head butler and the old gardener served as witnesses, both visibly uncomfortable. Alexander James Blackwood, take you, Isabella Marie Crawford, as my lawful wife," the Count recited, his voice resonating with a determination that surprised even him. Isabella, in turn, spoke her vows with a mixture of fear and hope. When the Reverend declared them husband and wife, a heavy silence filled the chapel. There were no passionate kisses or tears of joy, only a handshake and a shared look of mutual understanding. As they left the church, they encountered a small, crowd of curious onlookers who, defying the rain, had gathered to witness the extraordinary event. Their faces showed everything from amazement to barely concealed indignation. "It seems we are already the county's scandal," Isabella murmured, clinging to her now husband's arm. "I am accustomed to their whispers about me," Alexander answered indifferently. Now they shall have something new to add to their gossip. Among the crowd, Isabella distinguished Mrs. Pembleton, the local magistrate's wife, with other ladies. The Countess of Blackwood, what a fall for the title. A pregnant woman of no standing and a dishonest traitor. What a fitting pair. Alexander sensed the tension in Isabella's body, and in a protective gesture that surprised them both, he drew her closer to him. "I grant you no power to wound her with your words, madam," he said loudly enough for those present to hear. "She is now above you all." Returning to the mansion as the carriage advanced along muddy roads, Isabella dared to ask, "Do you already regret your impulse, my lord?" Alexander looked at the young woman fate had placed in his path, her chin raised, defying the world despite her vulnerability. "No, Isabella, I believe we have made the right decision, for reasons neither of us may fully understand yet." The carriage continued its journey through the rain, carrying its passengers toward an uncertain, yet promising future. The first rays of morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the eastern chamber when Isabella awoke, momentarily disoriented. It took her several seconds to remember where she was, in the Blackwood mansion, as the Countess. Her hand instinctively caressed her swollen belly, feeling the movement of the life within her. That first week as the Count's wife passed in a state of unreality. The mansion, though impressive with its high ceilings and ancient family heirlooms, conveyed a feeling of abandonment and melancholy. The staff, now reduced to essentials, treated her with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, has assigned me to serve you, my lady." A young maid with freckled features and a kind expression introduced herself. "My name is Ruth. I shall be responsible for attending to you personally." Isabella thanked the gesture with a genuine smile, the first in many days. Ruth would become her only ally in that house where the ghosts of the past seemed to lurk in every corner. Alexander, meanwhile, maintained a courteous distance. They shared meals in silence, interrupted only by brief exchanges about everyday matters. The Count spent most of his day locked in his study or riding through his lands, returning at dusk, with a face marked by fatigue and something else Isabella could not decipher. One afternoon, while exploring the library, Isabella encountered Lady Margaret Blackwood, Alexander's elderly aunt, and the last living relative who maintained contact with him. The woman, of aristocratic bearing and penetrating gaze, examined her from head to toe without concealment. "So you are the young woman who has trapped my nephew in this hasty marriage," she said with false politeness. "I have trapped no one, my lady," Isabella replied firmly. "Your nephew offered me his name in an act of generosity I shall never forget." "Generosity," Lady Margaret laughed without humor. "Alexander has always been impulsive, even before the scandal. But marrying a complete stranger, carrying another man's child," she shook her head. "I warn you, girl, this marriage shall only bring more dishonor to this family." Isabella felt her blood boil at those hurtful words. "I regret that your nephew did not consult you before making this decision, Lady Margaret. But I am now the Countess of Blackwood, and I shall not allow anyone, not even you, to make me feel I do not deserve to be here." The old woman seemed surprised by her firmness. After a moment of tense silence, she murmured with grudging respect, "At least you have spirit. You shall need it." That night, upon entering the dining room for supper, Isabella found Alexander contemplating the portrait of a young and beautiful woman above the fireplace. "She was my mother," he explained upon noticing her gaze. "She died when I was 12. It must have been very difficult." It was. "My father never recovered, became distant, cold. He died 5 years ago, probably relieved not to live to see my fall from grace." Isabella approached and in an instinctive gesture took his hand. He tensed momentarily but did not withdraw it. "I met your aunt today," she commented. "She does not seem to approve of our marriage." Alexander smiled ironically. "Lady Margaret has not approved of anything I have done for years. Do not take it personally." They dined in a less uncomfortable silence than usual. At the end, when Isabella was about to retire, Alexander stopped her. "Isabella, I have been thinking. The child you carry, when he is born, he shall bear my name. I would like, if you agree, to treat him as mine in every way." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do such a thing?" "Because we all deserve." "A new beginning," he simply replied. The days turned into weeks. Isabella's belly grew, as did the strange complicity that began forming between her and the Count. The silent dinners gave way to increasingly lengthy conversations, discovering with surprise unexpected affinities. Both loved Wordsworth's poetry, shared political opinions that would scandalize high society, and found comfort in long walks through the gardens when weather permitted. One October night, while a storm lashed the region again, Isabella heard screams coming from Alexander's room. Without thinking twice, she went there and found the Count trembling in his dreams, his face contorted with terror. "It was not me. Catherine, do not do it," he shouted, trapped in his nightmare. Isabella approached and gently touched his shoulder. "Alexander, wake up. It is only a dream." He opened his eyes abruptly, disoriented and vulnerable as she had never seen him. "Isabella, I apologize. I should not have disturbed you." "Do not apologize," she replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "We are all haunted by ghosts in the darkness." Alexander passed a hand over his face, trying to compose himself. "I dream of them, of the soldiers who died because of my negligence, of Catherine. It was not your fault," Isabella said with conviction. "You were betrayed." "That does not absolve me of responsibility," he answered bitterly. "I should have been more careful, less trusting. My honor, my career, the lives of those men, everything was lost because I lowered my guard before a pretty face and words of love." The confession hung between them, heavy with guilt and regret. Isabella then understood the depth of the wounds Alexander carried. "Tell me what truly happened," she asked quietly. "Everything." And for the first time, Alexander spoke without reservation. He told her how he had met Lady Catherine Pembroke at a ball, how her beauty and intelligence had captivated him, leading to a passionate but secret relationship. Meanwhile, he had become close friends with her brother, Lord Pembroke, an influential man in diplomatic circles who had introduced him to delicate missions for the crown. "One night, after meeting with Catherine, I noticed that some documents on my desk seemed to have been moved," he continued. "I attributed it to my own carelessness. A week later, 12 British soldiers were ambushed. Someone had leaked information about their position. The subsequent investigation revealed that the leak came from his office. Lord Pembroke was the first to denounce him publicly. They framed me perfectly," Alexander concluded. Catherine took her own life, leaving a note where she confessed to having stolen documents from my desk out of love for her brother. Pembroke presented himself as the victim of my betrayal of his trust and his sister's. My world collapsed in a matter of days. Isabella processed the story, piecing together a macabre puzzle. But why? "What did Lord Pembroke gain from your downfall?" Alexander shook his head. "I never knew for certain. Some rumored he had debts to dangerous people. Others that he sold information to the highest bidder. I was too destroyed to investigate." Isabella hesitated, wondering whether to share her suspicion. What if Lady Catherine did not take her own life? Alexander stared at her. "What do you mean? Think about it. A note confessing just enough to incriminate you while exonerating her brother. Is it not too convenient?" A heavy silence fell between them as Alexander absorbed the possibility he had never considered. "My God," he finally murmured. "I have been so blinded by guilt that I never contemplated that Lord Pembroke might have murdered his own sister to silence her." "It is a terrible possibility," Isabella completed, "but it would explain the perfection of his trap." Alexander rose abruptly and began pacing the room. "If what you say is true, Pembroke is not only a traitor but a murderer, and I have borne his guilt for years." They looked into each other's eyes, a new understanding forming between them. Alexander approached and gently took Isabella's hands in his own. "Thank you," he simply said, "for listening, for seeing what I could not see. Sometimes we need another's perspective to find truth in our own stories." she replied. Lightning briefly illuminated the room, revealing something new in both their eyes, trust, and perhaps the beginning of something deeper. I should return to my room, Isabella suggested, though Alexander did not release her hands. Will you try to clear your name now? She dared to ask. I do not know, he answered honestly. But for the first time in 3 years, I feel there might be a future beyond these walls and these memories, and I owe that to you, Isabella. Snow fell softly on the Blackwood estate grounds when Isabella felt the first contractions. It was an early December morning, earlier than expected. The pain woke her with such intensity she could barely contain a scream. Ruth, her maid who slept in the adjacent room, was summoned immediately. Within minutes, the entire house was in motion. Ruth ran to fetch the village midwife while servants prepared hot water and clean cloths. Alexander, alerted by the commotion, appeared at Isabella's door with a face pale with concern. Is there anything I can do? He asked, clearly out of his element. Isabella, between contractions, managed a strained smile. Pray, my lord. It seems your heir is eager to meet the world. The following hours passed in an increasing haze of pain. The midwife, Mrs. Fenton, arrived with her bag of herbs and ointments, but her expression grew worried when she examined Isabella. The baby is breech, my lady, she said quietly. It shall be a difficult birth. The news spread through the house like an ill omen. Alexander, unable to stay away, waited in the corridor, pacing like a caged animal. Each of Isabella's screams pierced his chest like a dagger. Should I not do something more? He demanded when Mrs. Fenton emerged for more hot water. Unless you possess medical knowledge I am unaware of, my lord. The best thing you can do is stay away, the woman replied firmly. Midday passed and the situation worsened. Isabella, exhausted and pale, barely had strength to push. The midwife exchanged meaningful glances with Ruth. We must call the doctor, she finally decided. I fear for both their lives. Alexander sent his valet to fetch Dr. Harrington from the village. While they waited, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, he entered the room. The sight paralyzed him. Isabella, her dark hair soaked with sweat, struggled to breathe between contractions that seemed to tear her apart. Without thinking, he approached the bed and took her hand. I am here, he said, in a voice he did not recognize as his own. Isabella opened her eyes, surprised by his presence. You should not see this, she murmured. I shall not leave you alone, he replied with determination. The midwife, too concerned to maintain formalities, instructed Alexander to hold Isabella in a semi-seated position. We need you to push harder when the next contraction comes, my lady. Alexander sat behind Isabella, supporting her weakened body against his chest. He could feel every tremor, every spasm of pain that coursed through her. You can do this, he whispered in her ear. You are the bravest woman I have ever known. Dr. Harrington arrived an hour later when the situation was already desperate. With swift and precise movements, he intervened to help deliver the baby. One final effort, my lady, the doctor urged. Isabella gathered her last reserves of strength and pushed with a heart-rending cry. Seconds later, the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room. It is a boy, the doctor announced, though his face remained tense. Quickly, I must tend to the Countess. She is losing too much blood. Alexander watched in horror as a scarlet pool spread across the sheets. The baby, small but with vigorous lungs, was handed to Ruth to be cleaned while the doctor worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Alexander, Isabella's voice was barely audible. If I do not survive, promise me you will care for him. Do not speak thus, he answered, his voice breaking. You shall both live, and I shall care for you both. For many hours, Isabella's life hung by a thread. Alexander did not leave her side, holding her cold hand in his, murmuring words of encouragement he never thought himself capable of speaking. When the doctor finally announced that the worst had passed, Alexander felt he could breathe again. Ruth brought the little one, now clean and wrapped in blankets. Would you like to hold your son, my lord? She asked with a tired smile. Alexander took the baby with trembling hands. He was so small, so fragile, yet perfect in every detail. Their eyes met, and something within him, something he thought long dead, suddenly blossomed. "Welcome to the world, James," he whispered, naming the child in honor of his own father. Spring came to Hampshire, transforming the Blackwood Mansion's gardens into an explosion of color. James, now 4 months old, grew healthy and strong, filling the old house with laughter and babbling that seemed to drive away the ghosts of the past. Isabella had recovered completely from the difficult birth. Her relationship with Alexander had evolved into something neither dared name yet. They no longer slept in separate rooms, and their conversations by the fire extended late into the night. The Count's reputation began slowly recovering in the region. The presence of Isabella and little James had softened his image from that of a bitter, lonely man. Even some neighbors who once avoided him now came to visit, curious to meet the mysterious Countess and her son. It was during one such visit that the letter arrived. Alexander found it among the morning correspondence, an unmarked envelope with a seal he immediately recognized, the Willoughby crest. "Is something wrong?" Isabella asked, noticing how pale her husband had become. "It is nothing," he lied, pocketing the letter. "Business matters." But that night, locked in his study, Alexander read the contents with growing fury. "Esteemed Count Blackwood, I have recently returned from the Indies and learned of your marriage to Isabella Crawford. How convenient for her to find someone willing to raise my son. Yes, my lord, that boy who now bears your name carries Willoughby blood. I understand your social situation remains precarious due to a certain scandal. What would society think if they knew you had been deceived by a woman of questionable virtue? Unless, of course, you are willing to compensate me for my silence. Shall we say £5,000? I await your response at the Red Deer Inn until next Friday. Thomas Willoughby." Alexander hurled the letter into the fire with contained rage. He had underestimated human baseness. This man had not only abandoned Isabella in her most vulnerable moment, but now intended to profit from the situation. Over the following days, Alexander kept his concern secret, but Isabella knew him too well. "Something troubles you," she said one night as they watched James sleep in his cradle. "I can see it in your face." Alexander hesitated but finally confessed. "Thomas Willoughby has returned. He has sent me a letter demanding money in exchange for his silence." Isabella paled as if she had received a physical blow. "What? What does he say exactly?" "He threatens to spread rumors about us, about you, about James," Alexander replied, omitting the cruelest details. "Do not worry, I shall not allow him to harm us." "And how will you prevent it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am going to confront him," he responded with determination. "Tomorrow. I shall come with you," Isabella declared. "Absolutely not. This man is dangerous. He is my son's biological father," she insisted. "I have the right to be present when you confront him." Alexander recognized in her gaze the same determination he had seen the day he found her beneath the rain. "Very well, but we do not go alone. I shall be by your side." The next day they traveled to the inn. Thomas Willoughby awaited them in a private room, a disdainful smile on his handsome but dissipated face, marked by years of excess and dissolute living. "Isabella, my dear, as beautiful as ever," he greeted with false warmth. "And this must be your noble husband, the infamous Count Blackwood. How delightfully scandalous." Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding and dangerous. "Willoughby, I suggest you state your business quickly and leave this county before I forget my manners entirely." Thomas laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. Always so direct, these military types. "Very well, I shall be plain. The child Isabella bore is mine by blood, and I have witnesses who can attest to our intimate relationship. What would London society say if they knew the great Count Blackwood had been cuckolded by a merchant's son?" "You have no claim on James," Isabella interjected, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. You forfeited any right to call yourself his father." "Ah, but my dear Isabella," Thomas replied silkily, "blood tells, does it not? And I find myself in rather desperate financial straits. The Indies were not as profitable as I had hoped. £5,000 seems a reasonable price for my continued silence and absence from your lives. Alexander's hand moved instinctively to where his sword would have hung in his military days. The sum you demand is extortion, pure and simple. Thomas shrugged with affected nonchalance. Call it what you will. The fact remains that I hold information that could destroy what little reputation you have managed to salvage. Think of your wife, your son. Do you truly wish to see them subjected to the cruelest gossip London has to offer? Isabella stood, her bearing regal despite the circumstances. Thomas Willoughby, you are the same coward who fled rather than face responsibility for your actions. You speak of blood and fatherhood, yet you know nothing of either. James has a father, one who was present for his birth, who holds him when he cries, who will teach him honor and integrity. Things you clearly know nothing about. The young man's facade of confidence wavered slightly at her words. Alexander observed this crack in Willoughby's armor and pressed his advantage. Moreover, you seem to forget that my own reputation was built on far more substantial foundations than yours. I was a decorated officer, a trusted diplomat. You are a failed merchant with debts. Who do you think society would believe if this became a matter of public discourse? Thomas's smile faltered entirely now. You cannot bluff your way out of this, Blackwood. I have letters, proof of my relationship with Isabella. But do you have proof that the child is yours? Alexander asked quietly. Because I have legal documents stating that James is my legitimate son, born in wedlock to my lawful wife. Any claims you might make would be those of a desperate man seeking to extort money from his betters. Isabella felt a surge of admiration for her husband's strategic thinking. She had not realized how thoroughly he had considered every legal angle. Furthermore, Alexander continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, if you persist in this course, I shall be forced to investigate certain irregularities in your family's business dealings with Isabella's family. I suspect a thorough examination of those transactions might reveal some interesting discrepancies. Thomas paled, clearly understanding the threat. You cannot prove anything. Perhaps not, Alexander replied with a cold smile. But I have resources you lack, connections in government and industry. I could make your life very uncomfortable, Mr. Willoughby. Far more uncomfortable than any temporary financial embarrassment you might currently be experiencing. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the inn's common room below. Isabella watched as Thomas's confidence crumbled entirely. She realized that Alexander had not only protected them, but had turned the tables. Completely. Thomas was no longer the predator, but the prey. Very well, Thomas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps I was hasty in my approach. I shall withdraw my request and leave the county, Alexander added firmly. Today. Thomas nodded reluctantly, gathering his papers with shaking hands. As they prepared to leave, Isabella turned to face her. Former tormentor, one final time. Thomas, she said quietly, I once thought I loved you. I thank Providence daily that you showed your true nature before you could do more damage. You will never contact us again, and you will never speak James's name. If you do, you will answer to me, and I promise you that my husband's threats will seem gentle compared to a mother's fury. The journey back to Blackwood Manor passed in contemplative silence. It was only when they were safely within their own walls that Isabella finally allowed herself to tremble. Alexander immediately wrapped her in his arms, holding her as she released the tension and fear she had suppressed during the confrontation. He cannot hurt us anymore, he murmured into her hair. You were magnificent today. As were you, she replied, looking up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears and something deeper. You protected us completely. That night, as they sat before the fire in the library with James sleeping peacefully in Isabella's arms, Alexander made a decision that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Isabella, he began carefully, there is something I must tell you, something I should have said long ago. She looked at him expectantly, seeing a vulnerability in his expression that touched her heart. When I found you that day in the storm, I thought I was offering you refuge out of duty, perhaps even guilt over my own circumstances. But somewhere, along the way, that changed. You have brought light back into my life, purpose, hope. You and James have made me remember who I was before the scandal, before the bitterness. I find myself caring for you both more deeply than I ever thought possible." Isabella felt her heart racing as she processed his words. "Alexander," she whispered, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected declaration. "I know I have no right to expect anything more than what we agreed upon," he continued quickly. "Our marriage was one of convenience, born of desperation. But if there is any chance that you might come to feel something more than mere gratitude or companionship, I would consider myself the most fortunate man alive." Isabella shifted James to one arm and reached out to touch Alexander's face with her free hand. "My dear husband," she said softly, "do you truly not see how much you have come to mean to me? You saved me from more than just the storm that night. You gave me dignity when the world would have cast me aside. You claimed my son as your own without hesitation. You have shown me what true honor looks like." Alexander caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Then you could love me, despite everything, despite the scandal, despite the circumstances of our marriage." Isabella smiled, tears finally spilling over. "I already do love you, Alexander. I have for weeks now, though I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. I thought such feelings would be unwelcome, that you might see them as presumptuous given our arrangement." They drew closer together, and for the first time since their wedding day, Alexander kissed his wife properly. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Isabella," Alexander said formally, taking her hand in his, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife in truth, not merely in name? Will you share my bed, my life, my dreams for the future?" She answered by kissing him again, more passionately this time. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to everything." The months that followed were the happiest either of them had ever known. Their marriage transformed from one of convenience to one of deep love and mutual respect. James thrived under the love of both parents, growing into a bright, healthy toddler who brought joy to everyone in the household. Even the servants noticed the change in their master, how the lines of bitterness around his eyes had softened, how readily he smiled now. Alexander began to take a more active role in local society, attending county meetings and social gatherings with Isabella at his side. Her grace and intelligence quickly won over even their harshest critics. The couple, who had once been the subject of scandalous whispers, became respected members of the community. It was during a visit to London, nearly 2 years after their marriage, that Alexander encountered Lord Pembroke at a gentleman's club. The man who had orchestrated his downfall looked older, more careworn, as if the weight of his secrets had begun to tell on him. "Blackwood," Pembroke said with forced joviality, "I heard you had returned to society. Married, I believe." "Indeed, Alexander," replied coolly. "I am a fortunate man." Pembroke's smile became strained. "I trust you harbor no ill will over past misunderstandings. After all, I was merely doing my duty in reporting the irregularities I discovered." Alexander studied the man who had destroyed his first life, feeling nothing but pity. "The truth has a way of emerging eventually, Pembroke. Sometimes it simply takes patience." Something in Alexander's tone must have conveyed his knowledge, for Pembroke's face went ashen. "You cannot prove anything," he said quickly, too quickly. Alexander smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps not. But then again, perhaps I no longer need to. I have found happiness beyond anything I thought possible. My wife, my son, they are worth more to me than any revenge or vindication." As Alexander walked away, he felt the last chains of his past finally falling away. He had chosen forgiveness over vengeance, love over hatred, and in doing so had found a peace that no external vindication could have provided. He returned to Hampshire with a light heart, eager to share with Isabella the final chapter of his old life's closure. Years passed in contentment. James grew into a fine young man who never questioned his parentage, knowing only the love of the parents who raised him. Alexander and Isabella had 3 more children together. their house once again filled with the laughter and chaos of a large, happy family. The scandal that had once defined Alexander's existence became merely a footnote in a life ultimately defined by love, redemption, and the courage to begin again when all seemed lost.